Thank you first of all to the Abrahamic Interfaith group for inviting me to participate in the panel tonight. And thank you very much, Professor Halim, for your presentation and for your work, which is so crucial, I believe, in our world today. Similarly to Professor Halim's description of the Islamic emphasis on the sanctity of life and the duty of coexistence, Judaism too is rooted in conventions and moral obligations that call us to protect every human life, promote peace, build social welfare, and uphold human dignity. The book of Exodus teaches us that the demand for justice and moral law springs from the memory of slavery in Egypt. Leviticus commands us to love your neighbor as yourself, and the Psalm calls us to turn from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it. Many of Judaism's moral and historical principles took shape after the biblical era, through centuries of Talmudic dialogue, rabbinical ruling, and modern Jewish thought. The Mishnah in the chapter of Sanhedrin, which was also cited in the Qur'an and mentioned by Professor Halim, teaches us that whoever kills a single person, it is as if they destroy an entire world. And whoever saves a single person, it is as if they have saved an entire world. In the Middle Ages, Maimonides, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers, read the story of Genesis to mean that all humans are made in the image of the divine. What differentiates us is our histories, laws, and viewpoints, but not our intrinsic worth. Jewish religious sources offer countless calls to seek peace, pursue justice, and protect the sanctity of life and humanity at all costs. My claim tonight is simple and urgent. In our time, there is no place for any interpretation of religion that permits harm to human lives and to human flourishing in the name of religion or God. Our sources teach us that moral conduct is not optional. It is the very starting point of learning the Torah. Only on the foundation of the ethical behavior can we truly study and live our faith. And in Hebrew, that would be derech eretz kedma Torah. That means our way of conduct, our behavior, precedes anything that is with learning of the Torah. The only legitimate role of the religion today is to uphold the sanctity of life and affirm that every person is a reflection of the divine, each deserving freedom, justice, and dignity. As Immanuel Levinas, one of the most influential Jewish philosophers of our time, taught, our access to the divine comes through the face of the other and the recognition of their humanity. Religion, therefore, must answer to universal moral standards. Religion can be moral only when it is grounded in universal human ethics. Any interpretation that elevates one group over another has no place in our era. Such readings do not point toward the divine. They point towards forces that humanize and destroy us, just as Professor Halim has mentioned. It grieves me deeply to see radical nationalistic reading of Judaism used to justify the atrocities that were presented earlier. These betray the heart of Judaism and legitimize patterns of cruelty that can spread far beyond what is unfolding in Palestine today. In line with the work of Levinas, I believe that if religion is to mean anything at all, it must serve as a moral compass. Its purpose should be to help us become better people and to build a just society where all people, regardless of ethnicity and race, can live securely, freely, and with dignity. Thank you very much.
Now we'll hear from Leanna.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And kia ora koutou. My name is Dariana Sunnah. Firstly, I wanted to express my gratitude to Professor Green for coming all this way to our Dunedin and giving such a beautiful lecture. Covenants are a thing that are not only rich in history, but are relevant for the times that we're living in. Tonight we're reminded through Islam that covenants are not just legal contracts, but moral bonds that connect us to God and with each other as well. They're the keystone of our faith. They hold the entire structure of Islamic ethics together. As I listened, I was captivated hearing about how consistently the Qur'an, the Sunnah, and Muslim governments throughout history upheld these covenants, protecting the rights of peoples across all faiths, ensuring safety of churches, synagogues, and mosques alike, and affirming diversity is not a weakness, but it is a sign from God. As a Muslim today, I carry some of that history with me. I also live in a world where I'm portrayed as a fear or through suspicion. I walk through spaces where I might be the only one wearing the hijab, and I hold the weight of representing my faith and not just myself. But on the other hand, because of how I outwardly express my religion, I've met people from all walks of life where we were able to exchange traditions, stories, and learn about one another in ways that we wouldn't have before. Moments like these feel like small acts of covenants too. Building an understanding where otherwise we would have been distant. Building a community where we would have otherwise gave each other strange looks. I urge and plead with you all to get to know each other. A community is tied together by Abraham, and it would also be lovely to see some new faces in the Interfaith community. This, as mentioned in the lecture, was also described in Surah Hijrah, where we came from different nations and different tribes to get to know one another. This can only happen with genuine compassion, courage, and curiosity. Professor Ray also spoke about how breaking covenant will only lead to humanity failing. When I see destructions of homes, hospitals, and places of worship in Palestine, I can't help to think of how far that is from the Quranic commands to protect life, to be humble, and to enter somebody's home with respect. May God protect them from this hardship. This is a reminder that covenants are important not only in international politics or not only in these big religious conversations, but even in these day-to-day moments that we share with each other. What I take from tonight's lecture is this is about covenants with God and with one another, and they're only as real as we live them day in and day out. It might mean speaking up when a community is being mistreated, or standing alongside other faiths at a time of grief, or simply to just get to know one another, as I mentioned before. As we leave tonight, my hope is that we see one another in ourselves and become active participation in tradition, upholding our covenants not only through words and agreements, but also through kindness, through justice, and through courage. May we all, Muslims and non-Muslims alike, commit to this sacred trust. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
I also want to say thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this peaceful evening, to sit up here with these wonderful, peaceful, and powerful women is just an amazing feeling. I feel like I've been given a great gift, and I hope that all of you do too, because we've had the opportunity through this lecture this evening to be able to see Islam through a clearer lens, and that is the lens of peaceful coexistence, dignity, humanity, and stewardship. So I've learned a lot tonight about covenantal commitments that are found in the Qur'an and the Sunnah, and that is all due to Dr. Rain's unwavering and thorough scholarship. So thank you very much for this. As a Christian, and as part of the Christian faith, I've also been bound by God's covenants. There's a lot of disagreement in Christianity because goodness knows there are many, many strands. But there are 6 covenants that kind of run parallel. I'll just tell you what they are very quickly. Adam, the covenant of creation. With Noah, the covenant of preservation. With Abraham, the covenant of promise. With Moses, the covenant of law. With David, the covenant of the kingdom. Lastly, the covenant of redemption. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, as Jesus passed the cup to his disciples, he said, "For this is my blood of the new covenant, being poured out for many, for the forgiveness of sins." And in the Gospel of John, he adds, "A new commandment I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must also love one another." These are powerful words. There are differences between Christian covenants and the ones found in Islam and Judaism. But there is a common understanding as well. As part of the shared history between all the Abrahamic faiths. It's my belief that true understanding starts with events like this one. They help us to find the core values that all of our faiths share, while still being respectful of the diversity. Interfaith gatherings like this one can reach out across the stereotypes, misunderstandings that lead to religiously motivated violence. They reinforce the idea that regardless of religion or belief tradition, every human being deserves respect. We live in an age of unparalleled communication. But that communication has often been used not to build bridges, but to foment hatred through radicalization and intolerance. We have seen throughout recorded history how those who are classed as different or the other have been subject to violence, marginalization, and genocide. This is not the place to go into the reasons for this, only to recognize that it has happened, and it will go on happening as long as governments and the institutions cynically exploit the fears of the people that they represent. As Dr. Rain has rightly said, Islam has been a target of this, unfairly portrayed and is categorized as a threat to peace. It's not possible to mend all the hurts that have troubled this world since humanity formed societies to belong to and lands to defend. My heart tells me that the first step is to work towards healing intergenerational trauma that has been caused by division and persecution of all our peoples under the banner of religion. It's not enough to just regret what's happened in the past. There will always be excuses, justifications, but they won't help break the cycle of violence and bring peace to the world. I hope that we here can do better, that we can actively promote reconciliation and justice through love, respect, and especially kindness. Because the value of kindness is another unbreakable link between our 3 faiths and a cornerstone of peaceful coexistence. In the Gospels, Jesus often spoke of showing kindness to others, but most definitively in Matthew when he said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Within Judaism and Islam, kindness also represents a core ethical principle. There are many sayings of the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, on the subject of gentleness. Here is one. "Verily Allah is gentle, and he loves gentleness. He grants reward for gentleness what is not given for harshness." The Hebrew prophet Micah also speaks to God's desire for kindness when he writes, "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. I'd like to close tonight with a quote from Jalal al-Din Rumi, 13th century Sufi mystic and poet. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase, each other, doesn't make any sense. And I hope someday we'll all meet in that field. Thank you.
Very much to our panelists this evening, bringing their perspectives together for our education and so on. We're going to take some questions. I'm going to ask Professor Halim to come back up, and you're welcome to ask a question either of him or our panelists, or if they want to share in something which comes to the question or want to jump in, that would be fine. We've got a special person's going to run around with the microphone. So take that, and we've got a question up there, so if you just run up, and so we ask you to, we don't need another lecture, but a question would be great to help us build our understanding. So, please hold your microphone up.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Ali, for a very informative and fascinating lecture. I'm not sure if you or Dr. Osman mentioned that significance of covenant has been mostly overlooked in Islamic scholarship. I was present the other day when you had your seminar at the religion department, and I found it very interesting when you explained how it was rediscovered. So I think it would be very useful for everyone here if you could kindly share that with us. Thank you.
I've got a mic on here. So yeah, it's actually fascinating. There have been books in the past. There's been, in archives and in different manuscripts, and various covenants of the Prophet Muhammad, have been preserved in these, in these archives and these old manuscripts. But they were only ever studied by scholars, in isolation from the others. And so, because most of there are no originals that have survived, not that we've found yet anyway. But those ones that have, have survived are copies of originals. And because they date to, the earliest ones are, 9th century, 10th century, they're often thought of, because they were looked at in isolation, as being perhaps forgeries, that the Christians wrote them or the Jewish people wrote them to get a better deal off their Muslim rulers. Because the perspective of Orientalist scholars is that Orientalism is an approach, you could say, to scholarship that starts from the point of difference. And so Orientalist scholars of Islam approach the study of Muslim texts and of Muslim people as from a point of difference. They're oppositional, something like that. And so in their minds, and keeping in mind this is happening during colonial era or in after colonial times, that there's a perception that the Muslims are against us, where there's an historic enmity between us. And so they were kind of predisposed to dismiss these covenants as being forgeries. It wasn't until about a decade or so ago that a scholar by the name of John Andrew Morrow started studying these covenants, but not just in isolation, all of them together. And then this was followed by the work of Professor Ibrahim Zain, who's my co-author for this book, and his master's student, Ahmed Al-Wakil. When they looked at these covenants collectively, they realized just how similar they are. And so it reached the point where it said, it's implausible to think that people who are so geographically dispersed from around Arabia, from Sinai, from over in Mesopotamia, in Greece, in other places, got together and wrote these covenants that look very similar to each other. There must be an original source for all of this. And so this is where the idea started to emerge that the Prophet Muhammad did actually write these covenants. And they fulfill various scribal conventions. They start in the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. They have witnesses. There's various clauses within them. There's the name of the scribe. They're all scribed by Ali bin Abi Talib, who was the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. And so, they fit with a particular pattern here. And so the conclusion has been that what we're seeing is not forgeries, but what we're seeing is faithful replicas of documents that originally came from the Prophet Muhammad.
I got a question. Where the word zikat comes from? Because when you talk about the kindness, compassion in the Muslim community, there's a word zikat, Can you get it?
Sorry, the word? Jihad. Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of misconception about this term. If you look in the Qur'an, for example, or in the Arabic language, the word comes from the root juhud, which means to strive, struggle, or make an effort. In the Qur'an, there are very specific contexts in which the word jihad is used, or the word qital. Qital is more often used specifically for fighting. And you'll find that there are only about 3 conditions in which jihad or qital is permitted. One is in self-defense. If you're attacked, you can defend yourself, and this is referred to as jihad or qital. Another is if you're oppressed. You can liberate yourself from that oppression if you're a people, it's referring to. And then the third, if there is a betrayal or a violation of the covenant, you can respond to that, because what it means is that you are now not safe. The covenant has been violated and the peace and security has been broken. And so take, for example, one of the most famous chapters in the Qur'an in terms of this topic of the use of force is Surah Tawbah, the 9th chapter of the Qur'an. If you read from the beginning of this chapter, it says the treaty is annulled because it has been broken. What treaty is it referring to? It's referring to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, because a tribe aligned with the Quraysh attacked a tribe aligned with the Muslims. But it does say then you can go out and you respond, you defend yourself, but it doesn't give a blanket permission to fight against everybody. It doesn't even give a blanket permission to go against and fight everybody who is non-Muslim, or even all of the Quraysh. Because the Qur'an is very nuanced. The Qur'an makes very specific differentiation between people who may be part of a particular group, but they differ in terms of their beliefs, their values, their conduct, their opinions. And so just because the leader of a particular group, in this case the Quraysh, made a decision, let's break the covenant with the Prophet Muhammad, doesn't mean everybody else in Mecca felt that way. It'd be like assuming that, we in our societies today agree with everything our leaders say. It doesn't happen like that. That's not how human beings are. And so the Qur'an goes on to say, fight against those who broke their treaty, but keep the treaty with those who keep the treaty. And if any of them should come to you seeking protection, grant them protection. So this is why it's so important never to read verses of the Qur'an or any other text in isolation. Read the whole chapter. And in fact, if you're dealing with a particular topic like jihad or qital, fighting, you need to read across the whole of the book to see what it's saying, and then you will come to the understanding that there is a higher objective here. You can fight for self-defense in response to oppression and in response to treaty violation, but there's conditions for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question? We'll reflect on that. Go. Oh.
Okay, just wanted to add one point to what Professor Ali said. You emphasized only the fighting aspect of it, but jihad has a much wider meaning.
True.
Because, as you said, it comes from jihad.
Yeah.
Because the Prophet, peace be upon him, has said that the best jihad is to say the word of truth in front of a target.
Correct.
So that's something.
Correct, yeah. In fact, jihad has a much broader meaning. Anything that you do where you're putting in an effort is considered jihad. Going and studying and going out and working for your family, spiritual, to do those things that are spiritually uplifting, to stay away from vices. This is all considered part of jihad.
Just wanted to ask a simple question. I actually read several versions of the Qur'an because I was quite interested to see if it matched my sort of preconceptions, and it didn't. I just wondered, not reading it in the original, does that make much of a difference from your point of view? Because Christians argue about this all the time, whether you've got the correct language derivation, whether it's Greek or Aramaic. Do you think there's a great loss from not reading it in Arabic?
I think there is. There's something that you miss not reading it in its original. There's a certain eloquence to the Arabic, to the Quranic Arabic. There's a depth to the way the words are structured. It's a rhymed prose actually. When you read it in the Arabic language, you feel the rhythm of it, and when you hear it recited, you can especially get a sense of that, even if you don't know the Arabic language. So there is a little bit. I think if you look across multiple translations, I think that then you can fill in the gaps. But one of the things I do notice just on this topic of covenants is that not always is the word Ahd and Mīthāq translated as covenant. Sometimes it's translated as order or command or something like that obscures actually what it's talking about. And so I think this can be a problem when translators are not being very precise about particular terms. And I noticed that looking at translations of verses talking about Ahd and Mīthāq, which means covenant or treaty. Sometimes it wasn't translated like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's sort of an under-recognized aspect of Islam. The classical Islamic scholars, nor the contemporary or modern Islamic scholars, really focused on covenant as a discrete category or a central focus in the studies of Islam. And it's only really in the last decade or so that we've started to really give a very significant focus to that. And just coming back to the first question, with the discovery or the rediscovery of the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad and sort of the affirmation of their historicity and authenticity has come, reflecting on the Qur'an to see and noticing and identifying that so many of the provisions in the covenants of the Prophet Muhammad are actually provisions that we find within the Qur'an. So that in itself, I think, is a very strong confirmation of the Prophet's covenants, is that we find those provisions in the Qur'an itself, which of course, has a very high degree of authenticity and historicity, including through radiocarbon dating and other means.
We've got a question down here and one over here, so we'll do that. Because Christians, they recognise also the challenge of things being translated in a variety of different ways and some meaning you get from that.
Thank you so much for your contributions tonight. The question I have for all four of you is that if you see tonight's peace lecture as being an expression of covenant and fulfilling the ambition to build bridges and build relationships across communities, for the other 364 days of the year, what do you see as something that centres covenant in our daily lives?
I've got the microphone, so I can go first. To me, what's really important are the decisions that we all make every day. And we may not think that things that we do matter halfway across the world, but that's not true. We can decide what political party we support. We can decide what products that we decide to buy. We can spend time every day thinking about ways that our lives touch other people's lives. And each one of those things makes a massive difference in the world. Everything that anybody has ever done that mattered started with motivated individuals. And we have the opportunity to be those individuals. And that's the covenant that we can all carry with us 365 days a year.
For me, I would go back to some of the things that I spoke about earlier. I have a lot of friends that are non-Muslims, and we get into very deep discussions about our understanding of our faiths and connecting the dots of, okay, what's similar, what's different, and believe it or not, she helped me build my faith and I have hers. So my example of applying covenants and building relationships with other faiths on a day-to-day is just going out and having those conversations and not being scared to feel intimidated to ask a question. Because sometimes, we might be scared, oh, is this common sense, or does everybody know this, so I don't want to ask to offend. But yeah, just as far as just be respectful and be open to having those conversations and going out and meeting those people.
One of it is that I spoke earlier, I think being committed to our human values, being a good person, not being silent in the face of atrocities, and speak and try to change. We cannot be silent with what is happening in the world today. This is my commitment, and should be our commitment from the moment we wake up in the morning. I think this is above everything united.
I echo all of those sentiments, but one of the things I notice about the covenants in the Qur'an in particular, that it's a little bit distinct from the covenants of the Prophet, which are much more about how communities can coexist with one another. The covenants in the Qur'an much more about what is expected of us as people towards other people that we live amongst. And that has a lot to do with welfare and well-being. It's about looking after our parents. It's about looking after those people in need, the disadvantaged within our society. It's about, observing the prayer and charity. It's about speaking rightly in society. And if we translate that into our own kind of contemporary times, it's about not engaging in hate speech, not lying, not deceiving, being honest, being respectful. These are the repeated themes or provisions of the covenants that are mentioned in the Qur'an. So I often think that if we could just do some of those basics, how different society might become, and maybe we could have leaders who would also adopt that culture of caring about one another, bringing compassion back into making it, normalizing it again. And in that way, we might be able to hope that, our leaders behave differently, on the world stage.
I'd like to extend the concept of covenant beyond our faith communities out into our society. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have a treaty signed in 1840, the Treaty of Waitangi. And within our Methodist Church of New Zealand and other churches, it's spoken of more and more as a sacred covenant. So this is in the secular world, starting to hear this language about covenant. And I'd like to bring Shari into this discussion as well, because the relationship between Māori and Tawiwi, my understanding is that Māori think of that as a sacred covenant. So this is something that we Pākehā learn from Māori, especially from people of faith like our Māori chaplain and sister Shari. So I just would like to ask the panel and Dr. Halim and Shari, do you see that this is helpful in terms of peace and justice in Aotearoa and Australia to start talking about sacred covenants with our Indigenous people particularly as that is how they see it. Whereas our Pākehā society is becoming more and more secular. Māori is still inherently spiritual. But perhaps Shari could go first. Sorry, Shari, to put you on the spot.
The short answer is yes. I was actually, as I was listening to Professor Rain, who was kōrero, and ladies as well, well done, very good. I was mapping my tikanga, my whakaaro with everything, and actually it's the same, the values are the same. So, basically yes.
You pass along the panel if they wanted to share.
No, you go down.
Oh, it's okay.
Oh, they go on. All right.
As a Pākehā and a not so recent immigrant to New Zealand, I've been here about 25 years. I think that all of us extend our love and respect to those people who were in this land before we arrived. And we can learn a lot from those people. And because they have the connection with the land that we can share. And I think the important thing to remember for me is that humility is just so important. It is the ability to sit quietly and listen and to get an understanding of things that otherwise just isn't available to you. And I've tried to do that, and I would like to do very much more of it, so that my connection is growing.
Before I read about some of Professor's work and learned about the covenants of Allah and within different faiths, I think it's a pretty well understood point in Islam that promises are a big thing, respectability, keeping your word. It's just keeping your morals strong, and your word is such a big thing. So it's something I definitely sympathize with Māoris and First Nation people. It's like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry, but I kind of like, it has a lot of feelings to it. So yeah, obviously, you know what I mean, we stand with you guys, and that's my perspective. I don't know about everybody else's, and I don't know if I can say too much just because it's not my experience or it's not my and all that.
As I'm practicing a term, I'm a bit worried about the word sacred. I find it a bit, I come from a place where many things are done in the name of the word sacred, so I'm a bit concerned about that. But I think it's our moral obligation to be truthful to what history was, and to our location in the place, and to honour people who were there before us.
Maybe spiritual covenant, would it be? A little bit.
I agree. I think that makes an important point. What terminology do we use? But our religious traditions, Islam, Judaism and Christianity, enlighten us about particular values and principles of justice, of truth, of fairness, of kindness, of compassion, of mercy, and we can see the violation of those when we study, the history of colonialism in Australia or here, in the Americas as well. And we have an obligation to correct historical injustices, and to the extent that the Treaty of Waitangi and other treaties and the Makarata are going to heal intergenerational trauma and address historical injustices, right the wrongs of the past, we have to consider them at least as religious obligations. Whether we want to use the word sacred or some other term, I feel as a Muslim, it is a religious obligation for us to uphold the agreements that are in the name of justice and truth and fairness and compassion and mercy in our own times. So this includes the covenants and treaties with Indigenous peoples, as well as the international covenants and treaties that states have agreed to. Those, of course, that are in the best interest of human welfare and well-being and the existence of all people and the protection of all people and the human security and peaceful coexistence. Yeah, I think by looking at the principle behind it, I think there's a sense of religious obligation for us. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your contributions. I sit at home and I can't bear to watch the news. I feel so helpless and frustrated. And I'm wondering whether, as peoples of faith, we're being, well, I don't like to use the word passive, but maybe sitting down too much or not being vocal enough in the face of what is going on. Except that I look at our politicians here in New Zealand and there seems to be no sense that they have any sense of community, which is where I think just about everything starts, really. And I'm wondering, I did a design degree here at Otago University, and I remember one of our first lectures, they made us try and think of solutions to a problem. And we all had to think of 3 solutions in a minute. And then we had to get together with our immediate neighbour and do the same thing. And then we had to get together with 3 or 4 of us and do the same thing. And what they were trying to show was that the more you have, the more ideas you get. And there was one injunction: nothing is too silly. I often say to people, I'm quite sure the person who first thought of calling computers Apple, or a company Apple, was probably rubbish. But is there anything you would like to say in the sense of in the face of our frustrations and sort of despair in what is going on in the world? And do we need to get together more in order to have that strength of the 5 pillars and to do something different? Because I'm quite sure I'm representing so many people sitting at home in despair.
Shall I? Okay. I was really heartened by what Karen said, that almost the religion of Judaism has been hijacked, if I could maybe put it in those terms. And that's what I felt from the very beginning. At university I studied comparative religion, and I know what the tenets of Judaism are, and I know what we are seeing is completely antithetical to what Judaism stands for. To the extent in Judaism, if you have a field, you're supposed to leave the corners of the field unharvested so that people who are in need can come and take from it. This is the complete opposite to what we see going on in Gaza. And so, as Muslims, we have seen people hijack our religion, ISIS, for example, and the Taliban, and completely misrepresent, but be presented in our media and in our, in certain political discourses as the true representatives of our religion, and nothing was more hurtful. And I know, from speaking with Jewish people in Australia, how hard it has been because they're marginalised by a very strong Zionist, lobby and network within the country. They're marginalised by the media and the government as well. It's very difficult to try to express the core teachings of our faith in an environment where someone else is controlling the narrative. And I think 2 factors here were at play that have been very significant in what I would describe as the paralysis of governments around the world to do something in the face of what was recognised very early on as genocide. And that one of those factors is Islamophobia, and the other is the weaponization of anti-Semitism. I think many good, well-meaning people were fearful of expressing opposition for being labelled anti-Semitic. Such was how the narrative was being controlled, even though it was very obvious to everybody that this is not Judaism. And at the same time, I think many people were so fearful of the threat of Islam that, oh, maybe, you know, my enemy's enemy is my friend kind of idea, and let's just let this play out. But I think we've reached the point where people around the world have said enough. I mean, we had 300,000 people march in Sydney last weekend. You know, that's the biggest protest that we have seen in our history. I think the next biggest before that was the protests against the war in Iraq, which I think 200,000 people marched at that time in Sydney. So this is now the largest that we've seen. And this is happening all around the world. And what's also important is that Jewish communities are speaking up as well, saying this is not our religion. But that's a very challenging thing to do when you're a community that feels on the defensive, and you know you've got one homeland. To criticise that is difficult. And I know Muslims going back many decades had a lot of difficulty criticising other Muslims or criticising Muslim countries for fear that we're just further fracturing ourselves. But I think what Muslims realised is that, you know, this can't stand, and we must speak up against injustice, no matter whether it's Saudi Arabia or Pakistan or, you know, this imam or so-and-so doing it. We've got to be very clear about what the principles and values of our religion are, and if you violate that, we're going to call you out on it, irrespective of whether you say you're an Islamic state or you're a Muslim kingdom or what have you.
Probably have time for one more question. Is there something burning? Nothing's burning. Oh, we've got one down here.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for all your contributions. And I don't have a question here, but just to reflect on what has been shared. I think if the world outside were in a level of understanding the way how we are here in this hall, in this lecture theatre, there would be no problem, of course, whatsoever. So I wish for our country here, in my home country in Palestine, to be as peaceful and harmonious and full of understanding as what we listened to tonight, and what the panelists and Dr. Halim shared with us, and Dr. Noura the other day as well. However, I think where we should start, or not start, to continue is, as mentioned, to continue with ourselves, with the values that we believe in, and what we can do in our own households. The point I wanted to highlight is a lot is happening with young people in our country and around the world, and especially with social media and with artificial intelligence and all of that. Maybe what we can do in order to help each other as people of faith is to focus on our households, children, grandchildren, any young people in the neighborhood, start some conversations with them. The Abrahamic Interfaith group visits schools, high schools, to continue with delivering those or paying those visits. So young people could have an avenue or could have a platform where they could ask questions, where they could challenge what they know or unlearn and challenge, again, what they learned and what they haven't learned. So again, my focus here is on young people, on focusing on our households and how we can raise our children to accept all human beings for who they are and what they do and what they represent, regardless of their color, of their language, or of their religion. Thank you.
I just want to add one thing to the question of what we can do, and to add on to what Professor Halim said. As a Jew, I can tell you, criticizing Israel is not anti-Semitic. There are two different things. I can sense anti-Semitism very easily. Criticizing genocide is something that we all have to do. And we all know what we think about churches that saved Jews in World War II. And we all know what we think of institutions that kept quiet. So this is our time to speak. And I agree with Professor Halim that what is underlying that silence, which I find very concerning, is a very deep Islamophobia. And I think that his work is so important to show what Islam is and what we are seeing in the media.
Thank you to our panelists and Professor Halim. We're going to invite Greg Hewson, who's a member of the Dunedin Abrahamic Interfaith group, to come and give a formal thank you to our participants tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and good tato. As we've heard often this evening, this is our 22nd annual Peace Lecture, and I came across recently, you won't be able to see it, but over supper you can see it. It's a photo of David Longy walking in through those doors in 2004, which was the first Peace Lecture. And at that stage, we had no idea that they would still be happening 22 years later. On our website is the text of every Peace Lecture over those 22 years. So it's just Dunedin Interfaith, all in lowercase.net.nz. If you don't remember that, contact one of the chaplains or contact one of the Abrahamic group members. Perhaps those who are members of the Abrahamic group who are here tonight, who are part of our core committee, might like to stand up so we can see who you are. We have Ken Baker, Reverend Ken Baker, Dr. Najib, we have Hakan, so we have Osman, who is our chair, and we have Ruth. This is just some of our Abrahamic committee who have organised. Thank you. We honour you. We thank you for being part of this. And we have a real sense of God being with us, guiding us through these 22 years and on into the future. We recently, just last week, received a generous financial grant from the Methodist Church of New Zealand, which enables us to plan 6 years ahead with confidence. So we give thanks for that. We do want others, please, to join our group, especially younger people. Younger is like anyone under the age of 70. But especially students, because we need students to go to our high school. And this is what we've done for 22 years. Take Jewish, Christian and Muslim panellists, just like this, to sit in front of secular and church school classes. And Rolly Scott, stand up Rolly. Give Rolly a clap. So when Rolly was chaplain at John McGlashan, we would go, and Dr. Najib's son, Hashmat, was a student there. And we had a Jewish, Christian, Muslim panel, and the learnings are profound. We went to Logan Park. The dear Kristen Mowat organised that for decades, for at least 10 years. Kristen is sadly no longer with us, but her legacy continues, with Logan Park still being open to our visits. As Trinity College, thank you, Bishop Michael, for being here tonight and for your consistent support for Interfaith. And we honour what the Catholic Church is doing in New Zealand with the Bishops' Committee. And Colin MacLeod is a staunch member of our Abrahamic group as well. So we have strong networks that have built up over this time. So please do come along to our meetings. The meetings are held every third Wednesday in the upper room. And the upper room is the Chaplaincy office in the University Union building. If you don't know where it is, just ask somebody. Between 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock on the third Wednesday of each month we meet, and we have half of the time is spent discussing a topic of relevance to all three faiths. And in recent months we've discussed diversity within Christianity. I summarised that in 10 minutes. And it's a joke. Thank you for laughing. And then there's the diversity within Islam that we looked at. So we just skimmed the surface of these huge topics, but we learn a lot from each other. And I think it was at our June meeting that we decided to invite Professor Ahd Rain from Australia. And so between June, July, August, a lot of planning has happened, a lot of communications, a lot of clarification, a lot of sharing of information, a lot of arrangements for travel and accommodation. And so Professor Halim and Dr. Nora, it has been wonderful to have you both with us. Lovely you could both come together and that you're able to go to Queenstown, I think, for a few days. So on behalf of us all, I'd like to sincerely thank you both, and I'm going to try and not mix these up. Would you like to come forward, please, so we can give you a present together? Perhaps if you come and stand here, I can. So this one is for Halim with the sincere thanks of us all, and we do pray sincerely that God will continue to guide you in your scholarship and in your willingness to share with audiences all around the world. This gathering tonight does in fact have international significance. The article in the Otago Daily Times from Saturday, has already gone all around the world, and thousands of people have read that message. If you haven't seen it, it's a very good article. It opens the door to solidarity and for caring, but with a covenantal basis. And so we do thank you sincerely, and we give thanks to God for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Dr. Nora, you gave a wonderful talk on compassion on Friday, and we look forward to receiving the text of what you shared, and that also will go on our Abrahamic Interfaith Group website. So thank you very much, and a small token of appreciation.
Thank you.
Okay, I have here another artwork which I'll bring to supper, and it's done by a former member of the Abrahamic